What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back for part 2 of my 20 badass metal album covers video. If you guys saw part 1 on Tuesday, you would know that we're doing the rest of the list here on this video, because like I said, I thought about doing just 10, but the more I was thinking about it, it's like, I got so many albums with amazing badass album covers. I couldn't whittle it down to just 10, so I decided to expand it to 20. And in reality, I could have done 30, but I think 30 would have been overkill. Not really a hint as to what's coming up here. But I'm here to show off 20 more covers that I think are badass and really captured the music of the albums themselves. And the first one is the latest album in the collection that has a badass album cover on this list. And that is Eternal Champions Ravening Iron. This was my album of the year for 2020, and it's not something you would think I'd have as my favorite of a year, because this is more along the lines of like late 70s, early 80s, classic heavy metal that borders a little bit on thrash, doom, and power metal, because it has some of those epic qualities of power metal, though it's not quite power metal for me. They call it epic heavy metal, and I think that's an appropriate tag to put on this album. But yeah, this cover, I mean, for obvious reasons, tits. There are tits on here, but the way it's captured is really cool. You got the dragon, you got a throne with skulls, and like a serpent's tail, or the tail of the dragon. And of course, you got like basically like almost like a dominatrix submissive type thing going on here. You know, you got the mistress, you got the sub, and it almost kind of looks like a sexier, like, Lord of the Rings Tolkien version of, like, Jabba the Hutt and Princess Leia from Star Wars Episode 6. So it's kind of capturing that vibe a little bit, but done in a more fantastical sense, more in, like, in the Tolkien sense, Lord of the Rings, or Dungeons and Dragons, whatever you want to call it. So it's a good combination of cool visual, sexuality, and the color scheme is really, really cool on here as well. So I absolutely love this album cover, and the album itself is fantastic. I mean, basically, if you love, like, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and old Metallica, you will definitely dig this. It features, of course, members of Power Trip and Iron Age. And this is a great Texas band, so definitely check this album out. I know there's a lot of people that haven't heard of this album. Please go check it out. It is brilliant, epic, heavy metal. Next up, another band. Now this one I would say more than any band on this entire compilation here, that I say, if you don't have an album cover from this band, you are doing it wrong. Of course, it's the one and only Iron Maiden. Now, of course, Iron Maiden, pretty much like almost all their album covers, except for Dance of Death, are amazing album covers. However, for me personally, my favorite Maiden cover, I could have went with Power Slave, that was a close second, but I went with Killers. Just because, I mean, it's Eddie with a bloody axe on top of apartment complexes, just going around killing evil people. I mean, and it, again, captures the vibe of the music, which is that... And this was the first album done with Martin Birch on production, and really brought out the sound of Iron Maiden. Granted, it was Paul Di'Anno on vocals, but he did a fantastic job, and I think the cover perfectly encapsulates the sound of the album. It's got that, like, raw grit to it, but it's well produced. It's not overproduced. And the album cover, Derek Riggs, another legendary album cover artist, who I think did all their covers, I want to say up until Fear of the Dark, which is ironic because also Martin Birch stopped producing after Fear of the Dark, so kind of a weird transition. But Killers, Iron Maiden, really I could have put any Maiden cover except for Dance of Death on this list, and I don't think I would have been wrong. Like, Senjutsu's pretty cool, Book of Souls is pretty cool, Final Frontier was cool, but yeah, I went with Killers because I think it's the most iconic, it's the most recognizable one, I think. Well, that may be Number of the Beast, but I think Killers is a tad more iconic in terms of the album cover. But yeah, Iron Maiden, Killers, or really any Maiden cover besides Dance of Death could be on this list. Next up, we talking Judas Priest, and there are some great Judas Priest album covers. Could have went with Sad Wings of Destiny. Hell, I could have went with British Steel because while it's simplistic, it's badass and it really kind of created an iconic image. But for me, who's a sucker for some cool artwork, I went with Painkiller. After all, and like Painkiller, the album itself was like a cool, like, for me, maybe the heaviest Judas Priest album, at least at the time, before they went tuning low on the guitars during the Ripper Owens era. But in the Rob Halford era, it's hard to argue against Painkiller being the heaviest album of their catalog during the Halford days. I mean, they were going for that more kind of speed metal, almost thrash at times. But the album cover definitely captures the vibe. You know, you got the character, the Painkiller, on like a, what looks like a dragon bicycle with saws for wheels, traveling out of hell to get to heaven, almost. I mean, it's a really cool visual for damn sure. And again, captures the essence of the music, no question. So yeah, I would say Painkiller, out of all the Priest album covers, the best in terms of telling a story and the artwork itself. Next up, now this one was kind of tough because Creator's next. And again, there are a lot of cool Creator album covers. Hell, some of the recent albums, like Enemy of God, Hordes of Chaos, Phantom Antichrist, Gods of Violence, even Hate Uber Alles has cool covers. But for me, the most iconic, and hell, it's my back patch on my vest, Pleasure to Kill. After all, you got that image of what looks like Satan destroying warriors while skeleton army men are trying to go after him. Really cool visual of like evil taking over everything and just killing everything in its sight. And of course captures the music, and the music on here, brutal as hell for a thrash metal album in 1986. Just about as brutal as another album with a classic cover that we'll talk about later, and I think you know which one it's going to be. But Pleasure to Kill, I mean, that cover art is perfect for this album. Nothing more, nothing less to be said. And then to conclude the first half of part 2, we got another one that's kind of difficult to choose a cool cover, and that's Mastodon. Like, the majority of the album covers of Mastodon, hell, I'll say all their covers you could probably include. I could have went with Hushed and Grim, the latest album, because of the murkiness of it. Blood Mountain, Crack the Sky, The Hunter for that, like, wooden piece of the deer piece done by a woodshop guy. But for me, the most iconic album cover from Mastodon is Leviathan. After all, Moby Dick. This is a Moby Dick concept album, and it's one of the best concept albums, especially in the past 20 years or more. While it's not my favorite Mastodon album, you're going to find that out in the rankings for Mastodon coming out in August, but it's up there. This is a fantastic album matched with an incredible piece of art, you know, with, yeah, Moby Dick on with the shipwreck, Joseph Murmick and all that stuff, the Megalodians, Sea Beasts, all kinds of stuff. And the songs themselves, top to bottom, are brilliant, and they match up to the cover perfectly, especially tracks like Hearts Alive and Joseph Murrick just captured the Moby Dick story perfectly. So yeah, I would say Leviathan, for me, the best Mastodon cover. If not, definitely the most iconic. Definitely love it. 5 more to go, and the next one might be a bit biased, but the album cover itself is another one of those iconic covers. And it's ironic, my favorite album of all time, Metallica, Master of Puppets. I know some people might say Ride the Lightning's the masterpiece musically, and maybe even the album cover, but I think Master of Puppets is a little bit better because it's got a little more imagination and thought-provokes to it, or more thought-provoking things about it. You know, you got, like, basically, like, the Puppet Master with the strings on all these cemetery crosses, and even, like, a war helmet on one of the crosses, meaning, like, this was, like, a battalion that died in battle, and these were all their graves, with the Puppet Master controlling the bodies of the graves to make them seem like they're not dead and that they'll come back to life. And of course, as I say with all these albums, matches up to the music perfectly, especially the title track, which I know the song Master of Puppets has been getting big again thanks to Stranger Things, which I thank you, Stranger Things. I know there's a lot of people that are hating on that, and it's like, fuck your gatekeeping bullshit and just get the hell out of my life. Let people get into music through odd means. Hell, for me, if it wasn't for pro wrestling and video games and my brother, I don't know if I would be here right now doing these videos about metal, because who knows if I would have gotten to it. But I digress. But yeah, this album cover definitely provokes a lot of thought, captures a mood, one of my all-time favorites, and my favorite album, period. Now, whenever you're trying to think about, okay, what is perhaps the greatest death metal album cover of all time? And I've mentioned so many so far in this double part thing, like I had Scream Bloody Gore, Fourth Crusade, Butchered at Birth. However, for my money, I would say the best album cover in death metal history is Obituary Cause of Death. After all, the album cover, this was originally meant to be the album cover for Sepultura Beneath the Remains, and if it would have ended up being the Beneath the Remains cover, it still would have made the list regardless, because this art piece is pretty cool. It's like H.P. Lovecraft stuff, and I think this is a piece, I think the cover is a piece from an H.P. Lovecraft book. Either or, it's fantastic with the evil eye, the Tree of Souls with the skulls and like the bloody teeth and the little chimney there, or well, maybe a hut. But it captures like the murk and filth that this album has, and also the best Obituary album, I'll just say it right now. After all, James Murphy on guitar, and of course, like I said, album cover captures along with the music. It's like, I look at this album cover as I listen to the album, and it's like, ooh, you're getting those creepy feels, those goosebumps crawling up your body, and makes you think, holy shit, what am I listening to and what am I looking at? But yeah, in my opinion, the best death metal album cover of all time. Next up, another iconic album cover, especially in the 80s era of metal, and one that definitely sparked a lot of impact. Granted, it's simple, but hey, sometimes simplicity can be the spice of life. Ozzy Osbourne, Blizzard of Oz. After all, I mean, just look at it. It's kind of evil and very eerie. You know, Ozzy with the cross. You got the skull with what looks like a horn, and a cat, like a black cat, giving off that occult vibe. After all, Ozzy comes off as an occult-obsessed dude. Granted, I believe he's a Christian, but he just loves the imagery of the occult and evil and stuff, and wanted to capture that in his music, whether he was in Sabbath or doing his solo work. I think this, out of all the Ozzy Osbourne album covers, this has to be the one. I mean, you could go Diary of a Madman, which is great, but I thought it was a little bit cartoony, whereas this is like, oh my god, this definitely looks evil, and it looks cool, and it matches along to a couple of the songs. Granted, like, a lot of the lyrics are kind of lighthearted, but tracks like Suicide Solution, Mr. Crowley, I'd say this album cover fits best with Mr. Crowley, because for obvious reasons. But yeah, this is a great cover. I can't put it justice. I can't do it justice. The penultimate album for part 2, and this is another one you can make a case for arguably the best album cover of death metal history, and that is Pestilence Consuming Impulse. After all, ants eating someone's face! That's like one of the most brutal images you could think of for a death metal album cover that isn't like straight up blood and guts and pathology stuff, like in a more fantastical sense. This is one of the best ones out there because it's just ants eating a dude's face, and it gives off that like raw energy that this album definitely captures. After all, this is one of my favorite death metal albums of all time. Last one with the legend himself, Martin Van Drunen. But yeah, absolutely cool cover. And this is a slip, and this is the alternate cover, which very gory, and it's pretty cool, but it doesn't have the same impact as ants eating your fucking face off. And that's all I got to say about that. And then the final album cover I'm going to showcase, and another iconic one, and also arguably the most brutal album of 1986, were Slayer, Rain and Blood. After all, I mean, there are quite a few Slayer covers that could have made the list. I could have went with Hell Awaits, could have went with South of Heaven. I would say that Hell Awaits, Rain and Blood, and South of Heaven are the best album covers for Slayer, in my opinion. But I think this is the best one and the most iconic. After all, so much you could picture with this image, with this imagery, you know, like rivers of blood and what looks like a satanic sheep sitting on a throne, and you got even like a little devil man and a bunch of like dead bodies and chopped off heads and all sorts of shit. I mean, it's just, look at that. What do you think when you see this? Because it's like gory, it's artistic, it's evil, it's dark, and it matches up to the music brilliantly. It's like you listen to the album while you look at the cover and think, oh my god, this cover is basically what looks like a section of hell would look like, with a lot of gore and torture and death. It's fucking fantastic. And ladies and gentlemen, that does it for the second part of 20 badass metal album covers. Again, just like in part 1, let me know your favorite out of part 2 here, and what is your favorite badass metal album cover, period. And like I said, I could have done 30, but I feel like that would have been too much, but I didn't want to do just 10, because I feel like I'd be missing out a lot of stuff. Granted, I am missing out on a lot on this list, but I feel like these 20 are 20 of the best. Even though this wasn't like the best album covers per se, this was like badass covers that I really, really love. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Horns high. See you guys soon.
I've noticed that once people hit Slayer, they're like, is there something more extreme than Slayer?
Yeah, it's the crossroad, you know. Either you're going like, okay, this is too much, or you're like, I need more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I found Cannibal Corpse on YouTube when I was 12 or 13, and heard the Hammer smash the face bass solo.
Of course.
Of course, already then I was a bass player, but when I heard that, I was like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. This is it. And then it just spiraled downwards from there.
And it just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it never stops. It devours you.
Yeah, because